Hey friends, I'm Dr. Molly Brinkman. I'm a veterinarian near Nashville, Tennessee, and this is a show for people who love their pets, like to laugh, and realize that life is hard, but dogs and cats help. I love veterinary medicine. I'm probably already obsessed with your pet, and I want you to understand more about both of those things. So welcome to the Dr. Molly Says podcast. I'm at the beach. We came to the beach. It's the last week of summer. School starts next week, so we snuck away to the beach. So I am coming to you from Florida, and this week's episode is going to be a little bit weird because I'm just going to ramble at you about something, which I guess is what I do sometimes, but no set structure. I just want to talk about something that has been swirling around my head lately that a lot of people are talking about on the internet. And I think that you as pet owners deserve to hear some nuance and some more detailed explanation about it. So I'm just going to get right into it. And that is the whole conversation happening right now about corporate ownership of veterinary practices and the buyout of vet practices by corporate groups. And the reason I want to talk about this now is there just is so much being talked about online. I see veterinarians talking about it, vets who work in corporate practices, vets who don't work in corporate practices, vets who have sold to corporate practices, vets who have started their own practices that are private and independently owned. And then I see pet owners talking about it. I see financial people talking about it. And the people who are talking about it who don't actually work in our industry, I think are missing some really, really important context. And it's not a simple topic. It's complicated. It's not black and white. There are a lot of villains being painted in this situation that are not villains. And so I just wanted to take a few minutes to just tell you my perspective and my opinion and hopefully help you understand as pet owners who are rightfully confused and worried about this, help you understand where we are and how we got here, because how we got here is really important and something that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about. Okay, so what am I talking about? If you've missed this conversation online, there are lots of pieces of content talking about how corporate practice or corporate companies, often backed by private equity firms, are buying up the private veterinary industry. This is not a new thing. This has been happening for many years, but it is picking up, okay? It's picking up steam, and there are more and more practices being bought out by corporate groups. And most of those corporate groups are backed by private equity. And if you don't know a lot about private equity firms exist to make money, period, end of story. They don't exist to improve industries. They don't exist to take better care of your pet. They exist to invest money in investments that will make more money. They're not always successful at that, but that is what they exist for, okay? It's very smart people, very smart financial people who manage other people's money in order to make more money. And private equity has recognized the veterinary industry as an opportunity to make more money. So it's important that we recognize that and that the people behind that are not interested in improving your pet's care or your experience at the vet clinic. However, the people involved in many of the corporate groups that start and do buy practices do care. And a lot of those people that start these corporate groups do have really good intentions and they do want to improve veterinary care. But then the money from private equity is what's usually required to make those corporate groups successful. And in my opinion, that's when things have gotten messy. And then to make matters worse, we're dealing with something we call vertical integration, which is something the human medical fields saw start to happen several years ago. We all know that human medicine in America is in a big mess. If you are not living under a rock, you've heard about CVS and the controversy going on with CVS right now because they have such vertical integration that CVS and who owns CVS also owns, so they own the pharmacy, they own insurance, they own clinics, and so they control a lot of aspects of medicine, and there's a lot of conflict of interest there. Recently, there's a lot of talk in the vet world about how Chewy, a company that is a pharmacy, has clinics, is now dabbling in insurance and telemedicine. They have now purchased a corporate group of vet practices called Modern Animal. There's a lot of talk about that when that happened. A lot of people in modern animal practices got frustrated with me for talking about it because they felt, I think, defensive. Like, hey, don't talk badly about Modern Animal. I work for Modern Animal. Really wasn't about Modern Animal at all. My concern is that when moves like that are made, we're heading towards vertical integration. We know how that turns out in human medicine. We in vet med have the benefit of knowing the future. If we go down that path, it can look a lot like human medicine right now, and human medicine is a mess. So those are some of the concerns right now. For me, that's my main concern right now. Obviously, I really want private, independently owned practices to be successful. I want them to be practices that have good culture for their staff. I want them to practice high quality medicine. I want them to take care of their communities, and I want them to provide high quality vet med that is accessible and affordable for their communities. And that's what we all want, right? And we would love for that to be able to happen without corporate groups coming in and buying practices. Okay, so yeah, that's the ideal situation. Has nothing to do with the people who are actually working in the buildings, the vets, the vet techs, the vet assistants, the CSR. 99.999% of those people are wonderful people. They're not upselling you. They're offering you things like diagnostics because that's the right thing to do. It's what's best for their pet, for your pet, but they don't control what that costs in the practice where they work if they don't have any kind of ownership, right? And so there's a lot of people trying to make the people, especially the vets who work in these practices, the villains. They're not the villains. They're not scamming anyone. They're not upcharging or upselling anyone. They're just doing their job, and they don't have a lot of control over what it costs for them to do their job. Okay. So that's like what's happening right now. There's posts, people talking about Wall Street owns your vet clinic. You know, we love a sensational headline. And yes, private equity has a lot to do with corporate buyout of vet practices, but there's just a lot more to it. So I want to talk a little bit about how we got here, because I don't hear people sort of delve into this topic, but I think it's really important, and I think it might help you as pet owners understand why we're here and help us hopefully with a path forward in private practice. So corporate started buying private practices several years ago. They also came on the scene a long time ago. Banfield was one of the OG corporate veterinary practices. They started building their own practices in PetSmarts, right? And they had their own sort of model. It was separate from GP medicine. Corporate medicine sort of evolved. Veterinary specialties became a lot more popular. That's one way the industry has changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. It used to be that your GP vet, when your dog or your cat had an issue, your GP vet was all you had. If they needed major surgery, your GP vet had to figure out how to do it. Now we have specialists, surgeons, cardiologists, internists, whatever, all over the place. In most cities, you have access to all those specialties. And so general practice veterinary medicine has changed and it's become less of those services in some places. So when Banfield, VCA was one of the first big corporate groups to come along and get into practices, before those were there was this kind of big generation of veterinarians who owned practices. They graduated from vet school 30 to 40 years ago. Many of them started practices quickly after vet school. Most of them were men. That's just fact and reality because most veterinarians at the time were men. And most of them did not have any kind of formal business training. They certainly didn't get that from vet school. A lot of them went to vet school in 3 years because they had accelerated programs, and they did not have access to a plethora of business advice like we do now because of social media and the internet and things like that. So there's this whole generation of veterinarians who have in the last 10 to 15 years, which coincides with corporate buyout, sold their practices. And for a long time, and I'm just saying this from what I've witnessed firsthand, what I know from talking to people, a lot of those practices were not run very well on the business side. They weren't charging as much as they should have. They were trying to keep prices as low as possible, but because of that, they also were not paying staff as well as they probably should have been. Support staff in veterinary practices have not been paid well for a very, very long time. It's finally changing. We actually have corporate veterinary medicine probably to thank for that. But that was sort of what was going on. We had these family-owned practices that some of them were really great environments, but people were not paid that great, which allowed prices to stay really low. The cost to run these practices was a lot lower then than it is now. And so in the last 20, 30 years, the cost to run practices has gone up tremendously. The ownership of these practices has changed hands. People who have bought the practices are either private individuals like me or they're corporate groups. And a lot of those people recognize that in order to keep really good, high quality staff, they need to pay them well, and they should pay them better, right? And so that has led to this sudden increase in the cost of veterinary care. Some of that increase needed to happen at a higher exponential rate than other businesses because we were behind as an industry. Yes, veterinary medicine was not charging enough for a very long time. They were not charging enough to pay people well and take care of their staff for a very long time. Corporate came in, they created some competition in paying staff, which I think it was a good thing. They also created competition in private practice feeling the need to keep up with the diagnostic equipment and standards of care in practices, meaning they pushed private practices to take better care of their patients. Truly, there were a lot of practices back in the day that didn't have a lot of monitoring equipment for anesthesia. They didn't have dental x-ray. There's just a lot of things they just didn't have because they just didn't feel like they needed to spend the money to have it, or it wasn't available. Now it is. Those things cost money. And so just the sheer cost to run a high quality, even general practice veterinary clinic that pays its staff appropriately, takes care of its people, offers some kind of benefits, it costs a lot more for that to exist. And so that contributed to the rising price of veterinary care. And then you have this upsurge in corporate practices that have come in. And because a lot of them are backed by private equity, they have to be profitable. And so they charge more than a lot of private practices do. Another thing I don't think a lot of people realize that is, I think, are the reason that a lot of these practices that are corporately owned charge more is because if you don't know how this works, when they buy those vet practices, they pay way more than the practices are worth. So if someone wants to sell their practice, they'll get it evaluated by an outside firm. That firm determines a number, which is called EBITDA, which is basically what the practice takes home, what the practice makes after it pays all of its expenses. That number, which is the EBITDA, gets multiplied by a certain number, and that number, that multiplier is determined by several factors. And what the actual true realistic value of the practice is the EBITDA times a multiplier, which is usually like 5 or 6 times. And that's what someone would present to like a private person like me. Here's what my practice is worth, 5 times EBITDA. Okay. But what corporate does is they'll come behind someone like me and they'll say, well, Molly Brinkman offered you, $1 million for your practice. Well, we'll offer you 10 times EBITDA or 15 times EBITDA. In some cases, that's been offered. And so they come in and they offer 2 or 3 times as much to these practice owners for their vet practice. And so naturally, what has happened in the last 20 years is a lot of these practice owners have chosen to sell their practices to corporate rather than a private individual because corporate is able to offer them more than the practice is actually worth. Why do they offer more than the practice is worth? Well, I think because they are backed by private equity. These are financial people making these decisions. I think they pay partly what they think the practice could be worth when they make it more profitable. I think they want to buy as many practices as they can. I think they definitely have consolidated in certain areas. So I know that some groups will buy several practices in the same general, like town, city, whatever, and then they may consolidate. So not all of the practices necessarily will stay open. They funnel clientele into a smaller number of practices, and that allows them to be more efficient and more profitable. Now, when we talk about corporate groups, there are so many different groups, so many. They own, we think, anywhere from 30 to 50% of like general practices now. They own most of specialty practices now. So like 75% of specialty practices and ERs. And I think that's because it costs so much more to run any of those kind of practices. But they own a lot of private practices now. And I do think they consolidate some. I think they pay way more than they're worth because they pay what they think it can be worth. And then they come into the practice, and over the first year to 2 years, they figure out ways to squeeze more money out of the practice. That includes increasing prices, which in some cases prices needed to go up. It can involve making workflow more efficient. Sometimes that means they want the people in the building to see more patients, but not have more support. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable for the staff that's there in those practices. I only know this because I hear from a lot of people who work in corporate practices that have been bought out. I personally worked in a private practice that got bought out by corporate, so I witnessed the transition before I left. I worked for a corporate group. I know from experience and from talking to people that these are things that happen. And then pet owners, you start to feel it, because what's interesting is a lot of times these corporate groups, they buy your practice, but they don't tell you that they bought it. Corporate groups, at least the ones I've had experience with buying private practices, they don't want you to know that they bought the practice, because they know that you might not be comfortable with that, and it might make you want to find a new place to go. So they don't announce it. They try to find ways to sort of keep it on the down low. They don't want to advertise it, right? But they go in and they make changes, and there's usually policies that change and technology that changes. They use different systems and equipment, and you as pet owners often will notice some of those policy changes. Often doesn't happen right away, but it happens over time, and then prices often, almost always, start to go up, and sometimes rightfully so, but often more than they should. What's also interesting is that these corporate groups, and this is frustrating for people who own private practices, people like me, these corporate groups, they have lots and lots of clinics, right? So they have really great buying power with big companies that sell pharmaceuticals, supplies, lab companies, things like that. So they can, and I know this is what happens, they get, for the diagnostic companies, for example, when they send blood work to a lab, those labs give these big corporate groups really, really special discounts because of the sheer volume of business that they give them. And they get these crazy discounts on lab work. But a lot of these groups, they still charge you as a pet owner the normal cost of those labs based on what a normal clinic would pay for them. So they're getting the discount, but you're not feeling the discount. I don't know of any corporate group that goes into a clinic and makes prices for clients lower because they get these deals. They don't change what they charge. They just take a discount. And I think that money is needed for them because, again, they pay way more than practices are worth. They have a ton more overhead as businesses because they have these big C-suites. They're schmoozing, they're whining and dining practices they want to buy, and they just spend a lot more money on those things, and they have to make up for it somewhere. And so this is where the icky part of corporate veterinary medicine comes in, right? This is what's icky for me. These are the things that I know. These are the things that I struggle with, because we all know that the cost of just living in America right now is getting higher and higher. It's harder for people to go to the grocery store and buy groceries. It's harder for people to afford rent. It's harder to buy a car. So of course, it's also getting more expensive to care for pets. I think it's very important that people have pets. I think it's important for kids to grow up in homes with pets. And I don't think that you should have to make many six figures in order to have a healthy pet. And so that is a major concern that is very, very fair. And I think it's something that we as an industry are going to have to figure out. I think we're going to have to make veterinary medicine as accessible to all different kinds of people who can afford all different kinds of care as possible. I think we have to be creative. I think we have to encourage veterinarians coming out of school to be willing to do things when clients can't go to specialists. I think we need to be willing to learn how to do those things. I think we need to learn how to figure out what plan B, C, D, E is when an owner can't afford plan A. And I think we need to do all of it with compassion. And I think We need to figure out what corporate's role is in veterinary medicine and how can we keep private vet med alive. And so I have good news. And the good news is that there is this really cool recent wave that I have seen and witnessed and am a part of private veterinary practice ownership. There's a ton of people right now, veterinarians who are buying practices or they're starting practices. And I am one of them. And I just feel this. There's so many people, they want to do all those things I just talked about. They want to provide accessible veterinary care that's also high quality for their communities, but also take care of their staff. And I think the cool thing about us as a community in veterinary medicine, we're very creative. We are very persistent. And because of the nature of our job, we like to figure out how to do things. And I think we're figuring out how to do that. And I'm so excited to keep meeting private practice owners who are doing that and figuring out how we do it. I think the next hurdle is how do we figure out succession? How does this next wave of private practice owners find a way to pass on their practices so that they can retire? People who own and run practices for 20, 30, 40 years, they deserve to retire well. They deserve to be comfortable in retirement. So I think we need to figure out a way to encourage young veterinarians to buy into practices, find a way to be able to keep those practices in private hands. And in some cases, I think be willing to take 5 times EBITDA and not 10 times EBITDA for our practices. There's a veterinarian on social media who I've been talking to some recently. She posts a lot. She owns a practice. She's owned a practice for a very long time. She's very passionate about these things. And recently she's posted some about how veterinarians need to be willing to be creative to treat patients and not euthanize patients because of money. And she's gotten some flack for that. I understand that a lot of people are uncomfortable with some of the wording because I do think it maybe accidentally vilifies the actual vets that are in the practices seeing the patients. There's a lot of veterinarians that are in a really tough spot because they work in clinics where they, like I said, have no control over what they can do when a client says, I don't have money for that. And so I think it's unfair for us to say veterinarians just need to, treat these patients anyway, because in a lot of situations they just can't. And I think if we don't, until we have more and more of these private practices that are wanting to do this in creative ways and finding ways to take care of their staff, but also be accessible to clients, it's not fair for us to expect veterinarians to just be able to give services away or just find a way to treat every patient regardless of what it actually costs. And so it's complicated, and I am rambling now, but it's important. And I think for you, most of you are pet owners, I just want you to realize that veterinarians are not the villain. They are not the villain. Your veterinarian, no matter who owns their practice, they are the good guys. And they are just doing their job and they're just trying to take care of their patients. And how can you help as a pet owner? I think supporting veterinarians is really important. I think if you go to a practice, even if it's owned by corporate, if you love the veterinarian that you see and you're taking care of, you should not change where you go to see the vet. I think if you move to a new town and you're looking for a vet, I think you should absolutely look for a private practice that's practicing high quality medicine, because not all of them are. But I think you find a high quality vet practice that's privately owned, that seems to be taking care of its staff, that's providing high quality medicine and doing it in a way that can take care of everybody. I think you as pet owners are the consumer here. I think you have a lot of power. I think you can help us keep veterinary medicine at least halfway in the hands of private ownership by choosing, when you do need a new vet, to go to a privately owned practice. I think the more private practices are supported in that way by the customer, by the pet owners, I think the more private practices will open because they can see that people want to come see them. And the more private practices that open, that want to provide a great place for their staff, like I'm talking about, the more opportunities veterinarians and young veterinarians will have to work in private practice and not feel like they have to work in corporate in order to make a decent living. So I think I'm very encouraged by what I see and hear and know. I know a lot of private practice owners right now who are really passionate about this and really want to save private vet med. And I think it will happen. I think another really important thing for you as pet owners to realize, and this is a tangent I'm about to go on, but it all is related, and I do think this is important. A lot of people online talk about the cost of veterinary medicine, the cost to own a dog, the cost to own a cat. And it's very fair, and it is something we should absolutely talk about. I very, very strongly believe that the cost of veterinary care for the average dog, we're going to talk about dogs specifically in the US, that is a number that gets calculated. What's the average cost to own a dog in the US? Well, that's a complicated thing because the number one most popular dog breed in America is the French Bulldog. And while I love Frenchies, they are hilarious, wonderful, lovely personality dogs. They are riddled with disease. If you buy a Frenchie or adopt a Frenchie, you are absolutely signing up to have to spend a lot of money on that dog. And when we have breeds like Frenchies, poodle mixes, doodles are very popular right now, and they are often really adorable and sweet dogs, but they have a lot of health issues, and they are bred by backyard breeders more often than not, and that leads to unpredictable health issues, and those issues are expensive. There's a lot of dog breeds that are popular right now that are very expensive dogs to take care of, and we see a lot of people buy dogs for thousands and thousands of dollars from breeders who are not doing their due diligence to make sure they're as healthy as they can be. And then those dogs, not only do they cost a lot to actually attain, they cost a ton to keep them healthy. This drives the cost of pet insurance up because the cost of these dogs is high, and it drives the average price of just having a dog in the US up. And so it causes this, I think, like false sense of, oh, it's so expensive to have a dog. Well, I do think it depends on the dog that you have. I recently saw this man on social media. He posted about corporate ownership in veterinary medicine. He's just a dog owner. I think he maybe works in finance in some kind, but he made this big post about corporate buying out vet clinics, and it's gotten a lot of attention, but it was inspired by his Frenchie who racked up like a $15,000 bill in the vet ER. And the way he talked about that experience in the comments are completely unfair. They villainize the veterinarians that took care of his dog, and they don't acknowledge the fact and the reality, which is that man chose to buy a dog that's really expensive and really riddled with health issues. And so it's hard for me to see the frustration with the cost of taking care of a Frenchie who was in oxygen when breathing problems are a very well-known issue with Frenchies. And so I do think that this is some responsibility that pet owners universally in the US can take. We're buying a lot of dogs that have a lot of health issues that are bred by unethical dog breeders. While at the same time, we have a shelter crisis in the US, and we have so many dogs that need homes, dogs that are euthanized because there's no one to take them, shelters that are crowded and out of money, and dogs that are suffering. I think about people in Texas. There's areas of Texas that are just like third world countries when it comes to the state of feral dog populations, or just dogs and cats who are just on their own, neglected, abused, starving, sick. And it is such a crisis. And there are so many wonderful people out there trying to help them. They have rescues, they have organizations, but it's a crisis. And at the same time, we're buying dogs all over the US that are riddled with disease and then yelling about what it costs to take care of them. So, I think we all have some responsibility here. And I think that's a little bit of an uncomfortable part of this conversation, but I think it's important that we address it. And I think it's important we take some responsibility for it as a society. And I think it's a ship that needs to be corrected. And I think we need to think really long and hard about that and how that's affecting all of these conversations. So yeah, that's my other tangent. I would love to know what you think about this. I would love to know if this helps you understand the current situation better. I hope it helps maybe with some decision making about the dogs that we buy and the practices that we go to in the future. And I hope for veterinary medicine, I hope there's some encouragement here to be found, because I am very optimistic and I think that we are going to balance things out. I think corporate is going to get in a groove. I think corporate practices are not going anywhere. I think it's good that a lot of them exist. They're not all bad as groups, and not all private practices are good. There's a lot of private practices out there that are not providing good pay or environments for their staff, and they're not practicing the best medicine. And so all of that could be better. But I think you as pet owners actually have a lot of power in this situation, and just simply villainizing veterinarians as money hungry, greedy, bad people is not the solution. So let me know what questions you have. Let me know what parts of this big conversation you want to talk about more, because I have some people that are interested in coming on the podcast and talking about this with me, people who know more than I do, people have more experience than I do, as well as some people in human medicine who are seeing the result of this in 10, 15, 20 years. So lots more to say about it, lots more to learn about it, but I just wanted to kind of share thoughts right now, and I would love your feedback. And next week we'll get back on track at home. Kids are going back to school, and we are just less than a month away from the local vets opening. So lots of fun things going on soon. If you're listening, just know that you can watch this. If you're watching, you can listen on any podcast platform. Make sure you're following us, Dr. Molly Says Pod, for clips every week. And make sure you're following me as well, Dr. Molly Says. And you can follow my practice also, the local vets, on social media. And I will see you next time on the Dr. Molly Says podcast.